Hi, welcome to Frederick's Garage, your favorite location for the eradication of oxidation on your restoration or your transportation, and home of the Bel Airror, the resto-mod with the rusto-bod. Today, we're talking about inner rocker panel replacement. This was a headache, especially on such a rusty car, because so many pieces come together to make this fit properly, and I had no idea where most of them were supposed to go. So there's a lot of measuring, figuring, finagling, cussing, and the like. So follow along and you too will know my pain. Cheers. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory to help you understand the problem at hand and the complexities. If you've heard this before, or if you're not sentimental or frankly don't have time, just fast forward a bit. But here goes. This car's been in the family since new. It came from Scranton, Pennsylvania area, and it's spent a lot of time in New York State lower tier, which is ripe with snow and salt, and it saw a lot of that. So the quarter panels, wheel wells, inner rockers, outer rockers, etc., were pretty rusty, let alone the trunk and the tail panel and the like. The problem was I started working on the rust on the car about 20 years ago, working on the outer rocker and replacing the edges of the floor and trying to fit the inner rocker. What I didn't understand at the time is the trunk floor was so rusted out that the two rear body mounts on this side were pretty much gone. That is the body mounts that are part of the trunk structure. And the car was sagged down. So the work I'd done on the floor and trying to line everything up previously really just wasn't right. The car was bending down at the rear and I just couldn't get the inner rocker to fit. Life got in the way and I put it on hold for about 20 years and I'm back on it. So this video shows some of the finagling I did to figure out where in fact I went wrong and where and how the rocker panel is supposed to fit. I have another video that summarizes this, but the short version is I waited long enough that they started making a new trunk panel, a complete panel made in Taiwan, Gold Star Industries, something to that effect. And I leveled the car out and installed that panel, and of course had to fabricate trunk extensions and of course put in replacement tail panel pieces there. So I basically fixed and squared up the back of the car, which set the stage that I could begin working down the side of the car and figuring out how everything fit. However, there are quite a few interdependencies here. I needed to put quarter panels on the car. They make these half quarters, and they're close, but they're not exact. And of course, I had to rebuild inner wheel wells and body mounts. Fortunately, they remanufacture the body mounts. So the inner rocker, which is screwed in at this point and is located there, it needs to not only line up with the floor, but also the outer rocker, the quarter panel, and the rear body mount, each of which has its own dependencies or interdependencies. So I've been working essentially on this side of the car for the last year and a half on and off, and I've finally got to the point where everything is getting close and is almost ready to weld in. But most significantly in the focus of this video is how I figured out where the heck to place the inner rocker panel. While I was trying to figure out the lay of the land, I used this stud with a notch cut in it on my table saw to put along the pinch weld to jack against. I don't know if pinch weld is the accurate term for a body on frame car, but basically the flange that sticks down between the rocker and the inner rocker. And as I learned more, I ended up using these shorter sections to better accommodate the change in direction of the panel. So used cinder blocks and scissor jacks, screw jacks, because hydraulic jacks will drop down over time, and use that to push up from the bottom to locate things. So just a little bit of backstory there. Part of the process of getting to this point where things were almost ready to go, I took lots of measurements, did lots of drawings. I'll post these at the end of the video if anybody wants to see the details, the detailed measurements. It may vary slightly for your car, but at least it gives you something to go on. Like I said, I'll put the still photos of these measurements in the video at the back so you can peruse them if you have a similar struggle. So while we would like to focus on getting the front half of the quarter panel patch on, we do need to secure the inner rocker permanently prior to attaching that. To that end, I need to rebuild part of the inner rocker, this small section here where the fender attaches. So I'm going to remove the front fender on this side so I can begin to rebuild that section, all towards the same goal of eventually welding up this whole side of the car. Trying to locate the rocker panel and quarter panel, well, actually inner rocker and quarter panel even more acutely. You can see there's little tabs that poke in that sort of set the level of the quarter panel inner edge. So to achieve that, I've put some jacks under here and I've used some bar and a 1/4 inch drive extension to push up that inner edge of the quarter panel, trying to get that a little closer to normal. With that, once I have that level set, maybe I'll rethink the position of the top, inside to outside. It's all a refining process, trying to get it as close as I can before I cut anything off and try and fit the portion of the new patch panel that I decide to use. Still haven't decided on the quantity of that panel to use, but like I said, refining the fit, getting us one step closer, I guess. So as I studied this a little farther, the quarter panel, the jacks and the stud had pushed the quarter panel up a little higher than it should have been. Compared to this point, the distance from here to here vertically, compared to the other side, this was about 1/4 to 1/2 inch higher. Another factor, this was in a little bit farther than ideal. The bracket was essentially, this rear body bracket was at the innermost point of the hole, and I can tell from the marks that the original bracket was closer to the outer edge of the hole. So this actually needs to come out a little bit. We'll compare to the other side quickly and see what the issue is or what the difference might be. So we're going to use this stud and try and figure out the profile of the inner rocker to determine how far out the quarter panel, the front portion of the lower quarter panel, is supposed to tip out. It's a little bit rusty, but I think you can tell that the quarter panel comes towards me a little more than the rocker. Rocker tends to run straight and the quarter tends to kick out. Of course, this side is still structurally sound, even though it's perforated by rust, but one can trust where things are located and the angles on them. So let's get under the car and see what we can see. So this is a lot of fun. Coming under the car, trying to work one-handed with the camera. So up here we can see that the rocker tucks away from the stud. It's running straight along here under the door, and up front it kicks away towards the outside of the car, which is understood. And then towards the back here we can see how the quarter panel tucks away from the parallel line of the rocker panel, moves away by the edge of the quarter panel by about 1 inch. If I pull the stud, keep the stud steady tight against the rocker panel, you can see that's close to 1 inch right there. So that gives us some benchmark for the other side, though as I'll show you, both sides of the car are far from identical. So if we hold the passenger side inner rocker up against the stud, We can see where the rocker panel is. It fits flush, and up towards the front of the car, that bows away, consistent with the other side. This is upside down, so that would be bowing to the outside of the car towards the rocker panel, or the underside of the front fender. And then in the back here, where it should make a similar diversion, it runs pretty much straight. So right here, this is where the quarter panel and the rocker panel meet. That's a couple inches ahead of the edge of the door. So if we look at the panel itself, it looks like we have a notch right here. So what I'll do is put this section of the panel on a stretcher to angle the panel out that way a couple of degrees. So let's try that and see how we make out. So I put a little bit of a stretch on that portion of the panel. You can see the teeth marks on the jaw, and you can see that the panel does bow out that way a little bit. So let's get this lined up again with the stud. So it bows out a bit, but it's only about 3/4 of an inch, not quite 7/8. So let's put a little more stretch in it and just see if we can't bring it that last little bit. So why, you may wonder, am I so worried about lower quarter panel fitment? Well, here's why. Come on over here. It's another car that I hadn't done, but these panels look pretty straight. This car's had significant work done to it. Aftermarket quarter panels put on, rear body mounts, inner rockers, outer rockers, etc. In fact, the only original panels on the car pretty much are the hood and the trunk. I think even the roof was replaced at one point. In any case, this looks good from a distance, looks good going down the road. But if you can tell, the quarter dips in or tucks in towards the rear wheel. And of course, it doesn't do it on the other side. I think I could disguise that by putting one of the large stainless moldings, rocker moldings on the thing. But in any case, what I suspect happened is they cut the quarter off, did all the work underneath, just kind of assuming where it went or putting it back where the factory stuff had been, only to find out that the quarter didn't fit right and they just tucked it in to weld it up. In any case, that's what we're trying to avoid, trying to make this as close to factory as possible, even though it's otherwise a rusty piece of crap. And clearly you'll be able to tell that it's been worked on significantly. That ridge that's in the patch panel is about 1/4 inch deep. And if I flatten that ridge out, I think that'll bring the inner rocker down to the level I desire to get the bottom of the quarter panel at the desired height with respect to this body bracket here. So we're gonna try a homemade anvil approach, see if we can't flatten that out a bit. I had formed this patch panel some time ago and tried to match up the section that I had to cut out. It was mostly rusted away, but I think there might have been some miscalculations there. In any case, this seems to be the right approach, so let's see what we can do. So I've got a piece of railroad rail under there, which should serve as an anvil to help me smash that flat without having to cut the piece out. And obviously I could cut the piece out and make a new one, but let's try this first. What we're aiming to do is take the ridge out of the back there and maybe gradually ease the ridge out, maybe up to close to here. So we'll just try and flatten this whole general area, and what I may have to do is put a little bit of a slit here as well to lower that. I've patched that at the time, which seemed to be pretty close, but let's see how we make out with hitting the back first. We'll hit first with a piece of wood because it is a little hard to get a hammer down in there, and we'll see how we make out with that. We'll transfer to a metal chisel or something if we need to hit a little firmer or need a different angle. So here's what we have so far. Looks like we've pretty much flattened out that ridge. And I used this kingpin, which I took out of this very same car, used that as my hitting implement. Obviously the hammer, but that was the driver. nice flat end on it, rounded edges or chamfered edges, so it didn't tear up the metal too badly. So let's see how the inner rocker fits. So there's a bit more trial and error fitting the inner rocker side to side, as in how far out does it go, how far in does it go. So you can see here we've had it located further in, further out, and now this middle spot is about the ideal location. And similarly, you can see that I've changed it up there. So why such finagling? Well, several reasons. One, we want to make sure that the inner rocker is far enough out that we can properly weld to this body mount. We want to make sure that it fits closely to the floor. And this body mount that we fabricated, let's get a little more light up there. We want to make sure that that's still a good weldable fit as well. So that's up here on the front half. On the back half, of course, come back here. So on the back half, we want to make sure that we have a nice space between the frame and the inner rocker, roughly based on the other side. We want to have enough clearance for this rear body mount. We want everything to fit tight. We want this guy to fit tight because, we don't have the firmness here to know exactly what this curve should be. We also have this filler panel in here, which is just clamped in for the moment. The filler panel does come all the way up here and fits in under here. At least that's how the factory placement was. And that really firms up the quarter. So one other adjustment I think we need to make is right here with the floor patch. I think I need to ding that in a bit to get the floor to fit a little tighter to this rear body mount. That could also allow me to move the rear body mount towards the outside of the car a little further, which should clean up this gap a little bit. Obviously, I could beat on that and bend it to weld it, but I think getting it right, minimizing the gap up here is the best foot forward. Patching the floor is probably the least of my concerns. That's probably the last step, but getting this stuff properly located so we can begin to remove the portions of the quarter we're going to replace, because there is a bit of structure to that. That's the goal here. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I've got the inner rocker held in with screws, and I could see underneath the car that this area, in fact, was a little bit too high as suspected. Down there where we had done our railroad rail beading, everything fits nicely, but out this way, there's a bit of a gap, a little too much to comfortably pull tight with the screws to weld up with a plug weld. In any case, I cut a slit and did some welding. And here's a little trick I picked up. We'll turn off this light and we'll put a little bit of a light shield there. We have a light underneath, and we can see that we have a pinhole there, and we have a pinhole there. And I can see, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but there's a pinhole up here, and there's another one a little farther in the back. So what I do is I take a Sharpie at this point, and I put a little ink mark on the top, because when I'm up here to weld it up, I'm not able to see where the hole is. So that's my trick. Maybe that'll work for you too. And here you can see the Sharpie marks. In this area, I put a circle over it, and here I just did a little line to denote where the pinhole is. So a little more grinding in the general area, and then I'll weld those up. Here's a picture of the fitment underneath the car from the rear of the car, where we flattened it out with the piece of railroad rail. Things fit nicely. And then where I've grooved it, tapped it down, and welded it up, things fit nicely too. You can see Up there, there's the mark of our stretcher where we put a little bit of a bend in this to send it outward. And I don't know if you can see up in there, but we are getting close to the edge here. We do have another filler panel to install in there, so we do need a little bit of space. This is the worst part of doing this kind of work, in my opinion, the pinhole chasing. So you can see, we're going for round 3. There are 2 pinholes left. At least I'm showing the Sharpie marks where I need to focus. A couple of pointers I use. I always create a new tip on the wire, keep it relatively short for a real targeted weld like that. Secondly, I've upped the amps just a little bit and slowed the wire speed down a little bit just to help with the penetration and short on building up the weld bead. In any case, this is a little messier than it might have been because I had to cut a fairly wide slit in order to bring this down far enough. If I was putting 2 formed pieces together, I'd probably have about a 1/32 inch gap instead of a 1/16 or greater. So there was a bit of fill work to do, hence the extra space for pinholes. Here we go. Here's a brief snapshot of the evolution of things. So you can see back here, this first hole, this is where I thought the inner rocker would live or belonged before I realized the back of the car was all sagged out and put a new trunk floor in and aligned everything. More recently, as I started to put the rear body mount in place and get a better feel for what's right and what's wrong with the car, this is where I thought it should be. And now, more recently, as I've learned more and things are progressing a little closer to a completed car, this seems to be where the inner rocker should ride. So we'll see. I'm not committing to anything yet, but so far this feels pretty good. As we progress fitting things up, that'll help confirm or otherwise indicate whether we need to change this. Good luck. So I'd mentioned that the 2 sides of the car aren't identical structurally and or location-wise. I noticed this when I was welding in the trunk floor and fabricating the side panels, the trunk extensions. So let's take a look in here on the driver's side. So here's the floor going back to the rear wheel well. That's that ridge is where the inner rocker, or what's left of it, rides. And you can see that this brace, this is the structure for the quarter panel, the inner quarter panel, if you will. And you can see that that sits on top of the floor. And there's a fair amount of the floor left here. It literally sits right on top. Okay. And the door's shut reasonably well. However, this door's never been off the car, and this side is not terribly rusty, at least not to the point that it's sagged. This is the factory fit of the door. It's essentially over top of the rocker panel. I mean, it looks like the gap is okay, but the door literally rides outside of the quarter panel and rocker panel, at least the lower quarter panel. But anyway, that's just a fitment issue, not a structural issue. So let's come over here to the other side. And granted, this side was largely rusted away, but you can see here, this inner panel is at the same level as the floor, not on top of the floor. And in fact, the floor ends before going underneath that. So granted, I've replaced essentially from here on back, but I did replace like for like, and you can see up here that that's in fact how the structure is. So the fact that the quarter flare out, for lack of a better term, the inner rocker and quarter panel flare out this way on the back of the car differs from side to side, I think is secondary to how this is fitting and looking right now. Cheers. So in looking under the car, the inner rocker doesn't fit tightly to the floor. There's a little bit of a low spot right here, as you can see, compared to the straight edge. And so the inner rocker has a bit of a gap here and here, sorry, out here, where it would attach or where it would touch for welding. So what I'm going to do is put a jack under here and put a little upward pressure, and at the same time pound on the alternate sides, kind of use the dolly off method, if you will, see if I can't straighten that out a little bit. It's not critical. I can modify the edge of the inner rocker to better follow the floor if need be, but this, I think, is the simplest. Here we go. So what I've done is hit on both sides of the high spots next to the jacked up low spot with this 2-pound sledge and a block of wood. And if we get the square here, the straight edge, we can see that that's quite a bit better. However, it's still under tension or pressure, so let me let off it a bit and move it over there just a shade and see how we make out. I think it's pretty doggone close though. Looking from underneath, we can see it's a lot closer here. Well, actually, it was close there. That was a bit of a problem. It was making the other parts have to reach. Anyway, so it doesn't look like it's changed much under here, but maybe I need to realign the screws because, frankly, from the top, it's looking pretty good with the straight edge. So let me reposition this, take the pressure off, and we'll see where we're at. So I've been marking the rocker panel, if you will, for where to cut the holes for plug welding the inner rocker in. So you can see I'm referencing the screws that are holding the inner rocker in from underneath, and I've used a straight edge to create a line. And then, of course, the welds, the factory welds, were about 1 every 2 inches. So I have a mark with a Sharpie or a scratch awl. There we go. Where I'm going to make the holes. So I'm not ready to put the inner rocker in yet. I think it's wise to start making the holes while I have a few minutes here or there. Anyway, let me get on this, but that's how that's the approach I've taken. Of course, the inner rocker changes position. It points towards the outside near the front. It's fairly parallel to the rocker in the middle, and it points towards the outside again at the back. So using the straight edge at these key pivot points gives me the reference I need to hopefully get the holes accurately drilled. Next step, center punch and drilling. Here are the holes drilled along the line that I had scribed. I have the rocker panel back in. While the rocker panel was in place, I made sure that the target hole location wasn't hitting on one of the few notches that were in the replacement panel. And once I was sure that I had a safe spot, I measured 2 inches approximately between them. That's the factory spacing. And then I marked each spot with a punch and then drilled an 1/8 inch pilot hole. I then removed the rocker panel and drilled the plug weld hole with a 1/4 inch bit. While the inner rocker was still out of position, I took a much larger bit. This is a 7/16. You can use this or larger. And I ran it briefly along the edge of the hole, both sides, top and bottom, to knock the burrs off. So here we have our holes for plug welding, and everything seems to be in order. Once I've got most of my welds in, I'll remove the screws, and obviously the inner rocker will be in place. I'll use a probably 1/4 inch drill bit again and make a hole where the screw hole was, enlarge at least the top side, and add a plug weld there. So each screw that you see protruding will ultimately have a plug weld securing the 2 panels. Here's a shot of the plug weld holes towards the back. Need to clean things up a little bit. Still have some residue from doing my drilling and deburring, but we are getting pretty close to welding things up. Here's the inner rocker ready to weld in. Got a good coat of paint on it. Got plug weld holes drilled and reamed out that they're smooth. Everything's looking pretty good. Once the quarter panel is a little closer to install, we're gonna weld this bad boy up. So at this point, the body mounts are located and welded in. And of course, the ones that weren't taken out or replaced were fixed up. The quarter panel is roughly mounted in place temporarily, you know, screws and clecos and such. And then the inner rocker is in with a full complement of screws, no clecos, just screws, and has all of its plug weld holes in place. And it's ready to be welded in as soon as I decide once and for all on the location of the outer quarter panel. A lot of work, but we're getting nearer. Moving along from the back of the car, we can see that the inner rocker fits nicely to the floor. Obviously, it's got screws in, getting ready for the plug welds, and it fits nicely with the edge of the quarter panel, the edge of the inner rocker, the number 3 body mount, the number 2 body mount, and the number 1 body mount. So I think we're about ready to weld it in once I fine-tune for the last time the outer quarter fitment. While the front part of the inner rocker is ready to weld in, I have not yet fabricated the filler piece that goes in there to close that off, and I probably am not going to do so until I've pretty much finished up this whole side of the car. So that's going to be coming a little bit later. That's a real simple job, though, at least in the scheme of things. No more dependencies with the back portion of the car. So like I said, that's going to be down the road.